So what does unemployment mean? Like everything else in economics, we have our own definitions. The unemployment rate is simply the ratio of the number of people who are unemployed over the total labor force. So conceptually, it's a very simple thing to think about. So it's a fraction of people in the labor force who don't have a job at any one point in time. But now, what does it mean to be unemployed? You're unemployed if you want a job and can't find one. Okay, being unemployed does not mean you don't have a job. It means you don't have a job but want a job, right? There are plenty of people that don't have jobs and they don't want jobs. So they're not unemployed. We don't worry about them. So the rate of unemployment is simply the number of people who want jobs but don't have them divided by the total number of the labor force, which is everybody who wants to have a job. So who is unable to work? Right? Too young, too old, too sick. Okay? That's just people aren't in the labor force if you're too young or too old or have some disability, right? Or if you're institutionalized, you know, somehow locked up against your will, something like that, right? So we don't count you. If you're in prison, we don't care whether you got a job or not. Who's unwilling to work? Well, there are people that have perfectly legitimate reasons for not wanting to work, right? And mothers with young children typically pull themselves out of the labor force voluntarily, right? They don't want to work. If you're retired, right, that means you don't want to work. That's what retirement means. I've decided I'm going to quit working because I've got something more interesting to do with my life. All right? And then students. Now, I'm sure many of you work. But many college students do not work while they're in college, right? So you're taking yourself off the labor market. So the fact that, you know, students who want to be full-time students don't have jobs, they're not unemployed, right? They're not looking for work, okay? So you can be unable to work, you can be unwilling to work. So therefore, you're not part of the labor force, so we don't count you in that pool of workers that we're going to worry about whether they have a job or not. You know you're unemployed if you're actually looking for a job. If you think that's the key definition, isn't it? If you're actually looking for a job, that obviously means you want a job, because otherwise you wouldn't even look. So if you're doing things like contacting employers, employment agencies, hitting up your friends, going to employment centers, well, you're doing something. You obviously want a job, okay? If you're sending out applications and resumes, you're obviously looking for work. If you're answering advertisements and such. So, I mean, these are things you do if you want a job, or at least to get your parents off your back because they told you to go out and get a job, right? But anyway, generally speaking, if you're taking action, you're looking for work, and thus you are part of the labor force, but you don't have a job. So to get an idea of how big this labor force is, I like to throw these numbers out because it's maybe kind of eye-opening. So these numbers are a couple years old, but basically 270 million people in the civilian population, so non-military people in the country. Now you take out a decent chunk are incapable of working, too old, too young, disabled. Okay. Take out another chunk that are able but not willing, not in the labor force, so retired people, stay-at-home moms, things like that. Okay. Takes out another big chunk of the labor force. And then of the labor force, you have the employed and the unemployed. So when you think about how many people are unemployed, we're worried about this little slice of the pie right here, right? So another way to sort of picture this is that half the population isn't even working or trying to work. Because most people are retired, too young, too old, too sick, they're locked up. Something's taking them off the labor market, right? So when we talk about the unemployment rate, we're only worried about this labor force here and how many of them are unemployed. So just to give you some perspective of, when we talk about numbers of people, what it is we're talking about. So if you don't have a job, doesn't mean you're unemployed. Right? You're unemployed if you'd like a job but don't have a job, which means you have to be doing something to find a job. If you're not looking for a job, you're not in the labor force. You've found something more valuable to do with your time than go out and try to get a job. Okay, does that make sense to everybody, though? When we say unemployed, we don't mean you're not working. It means you want to work and can't.